Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first meeting of the latest incarnation of the Local Plan Cabinet Advisory Group. And welcome back if you were part of the previous one, and welcome for the first time if you were. If members have any technical difficulties during the meeting, please contact the Democratic Services Officer on call, who will attempt to assist you. Today's Democratic Services Officer is Katie Brewer, and her number is 577046. It will also be at the top of the chat thread for members if you need it. I'd ask participants, when you're not speaking, please mute your microphone. This minimises background noise and will help everyone in listening to the proceedings. Microphones must only be on if the participant has been granted permission to speak. To gain my permission to speak, please very briefly indicate on the chat to the right side of the screen. I'll make a note and go back to you once the person speaking has finished. Would everyone please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and they're not used to make or receive phone calls while the meeting is in progress. Please ensure that you're in a quiet room, free from distractions for the duration of the meeting. So can I ask the members of the group to confirm that they're present in the meeting when I read out your name? Councillor Ashby.
Here, Chair.
Here. Councillor Bailey.
Here, Chair.
Councillor Robert Bayford.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Farrance. Councillor Fellows.
Evening, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Garner.
I'm here, Chair.
Councillor Hopkinson.
I'm here, Chair. Yep.
And Councillor Linda Piper. So it looks as if we're short of Councillor Linda Piper and Councillor Farrance at the moment.
That's correct, Chair.
Okay. I haven't received any requests to speak under Council Procedure 20.1. I don't think there's anyone else present who could put themselves forward that I can see. We haven't received any apologies, Charles, have we?
No, we haven't.
Okay, well, probably we'll see whether the other members turn up as the meeting proceeds. Are there any declarations of interest? Does anyone have any interest in declaring the items of the business on the agenda today? I'm not hearing any, thank you. So the first item is a presentation to introduce the local plan update process and to highlight the key matters for debate. And that's over to Mr. Verrill.
Thank you very much. Good evening, members. I'll just check that you can see the presentation. Can you see that? Thank you, Bob. So this evening, I just want to cover a few topics. One is just a general coverage of the update process, a quick sort of review of the update topics which were considered by the review group. And then I want to cover 4 other issues. One relates to the examination and soundness issues, the role of evidence gathering, the importance of sustainability appraisal and habitat regulations assessment, and duty to cooperate. And obviously, if members have got any questions, I will take those at the end, if that's okay. So the local development scheme, the work programme, was published in December. That is, I've given you there a link, and Charles is going to send round the presentation afterwards so you can see the LDS itself. That extends the local plan horizon from 2031 to 2040, and there's a range of issues that were identified by the review group, and obviously the role of this group is to consider those issues in a bit more detail and make recommendations to Cabinet later this year. I'm not going to say very much about the timetable, except to say that it is quite a tight timescale and envisages adopting a plan by the end of 2023. This is to try to fulfil the government requirement that we have full plans in place by the end of 2023. I've grouped the issues that were raised during the review process under sort of a number of headings. First one is environment, and members who were part of that review group will remember these quite well, I'm sure, but I'll quickly cover them. The implications of climate change, the link between climate change and biodiversity, biodiversity net gain, and green infrastructure. Issue about electric vehicle charging points, and to update other policies as necessary, depending on the progress of the Environment Bill, which, as members will know, has been delayed until the autumn, the Kent Environment Strategies, and a number of other pieces of policy and legislation. In relation to housing, to need to look at the local needs housing methodology and the impact that has on housing requirements for the district beyond 2031 up to 2040, and to look also at the provision of gypsy and traveller sites to meet the requirements that were identified in the study that was published during the examination. So we are currently running a call for sites. That's been running for about a month and finishes on the 21st of May. And members will also remember that Cabinet decided that we should be looking for a directed stopping site, and that should progress through the local plan process as well. We may also need to review a number of some of the more tricky urban sites that haven't come forward to see if we still think they're capable of delivery. On the economy, one of the key things that the inspectors raised was the need to update the plan in relation to the DCO. As things stand, we don't have a final decision on that, but hopefully that will progress to the point where we can address that in the local plan process. There may be a need to identify some additional employment land. We've started work on reviewing the home working policy to see if there's anything else that we can look at that can assist that. There is a report about the future of Ramsgate Port and Harbour, which has been itself the subject of some consultation. And obviously we'll need to understand what's coming out of that process insofar as it affects the local plan. And members will also recall we had a discussion about community wealth building programme as part of the review, and we'll need to look at the planning implications arising from that as well. In relation to retail and town centres, obviously things have changed dramatically over the last couple of years, particularly as a result of COVID-19, and shopping patterns have shifted quite dramatically. We had some work carried out by a company called Litchfields, who I hope will be able to present those findings to you directly at our next meeting. They looked at what retail floor space might be needed in the future, but they also looked at shopping patterns. They did a telephone shopping survey of Thanet residents as part of that process. And members may also be aware of the changes to the permitted development rights and the use classes order, which probably need to change the way that we necessarily look at town centres and their role. And obviously we have things such as the Margate Town Deal, which involves quite a lot of investment in the town centre, and obviously we'll work with those working on the town deal to see if there's anything that the local plan can say to support that. And I've just gathered some other points under what I've called other issues. There are infrastructure policies. At the last local plan examination, we published a infrastructure delivery plan, which looked at transport, health, education, utilities, and various other things. We may need to update those. We also had a discussion in the review group regarding a potential hot food takeaway policy. And the other matter that was raised was can we look at resilience measures to address COVID or any other similar threats to the social and economic life of the district? And again, that's something we're currently looking at. I should say that the local plan, as adopted, does have quite a lot of policies in relation to these issues, but it may be that some of those need dramatic change, others need more subtle changes. But obviously, the idea will be that we will bring those possibilities to you for discussion as an advisory group. I just want to touch on the issue of soundness. We start to drift into a certain amount of planning jargon here, I'm afraid, but the soundness tests are what is addressed at the examination. The examination is carried out by independent inspectors, and the 4 things they look at are the soundness tests. So I thought it'd be useful just to run through those, because when we bring reports and recommendations to you, in the backs of our minds all the time are these 4 tests of soundness. So first one is positively prepared, providing a strategy which as a minimum seeks to meet the area's objectively assessed need, and also, if it's possible, to help meet unmet need from other districts. And obviously the issue of unmet need and who meets it works in different directions as well. The second test is justified, and this is really about evidence, and I think I made an emphasis on this when at the member briefing a couple of months back, that it's always important to have evidence to back up your policy position. And I won't say much about proportionate evidence. I've been involved in numerous examinations now, and whatever you think is proportionate is almost always never quite enough. But it also says that we need to look at reasonable alternatives, and I'll come back to that in a minute when we talk about SA. Part C, effective, means we have to demonstrate that it's deliverable over the plan period, and it's based on effective joint working on cross-boundary strategic matters. So this is the duty to cooperate. And again, I'll come back to that in a minute. But essentially what they're saying is you have to show that you've tried to deal with those matters rather than deferring them, as it says there. And generally also to be consistent with national policy. So they're the 4 tests of soundness. Evidence base I have talked about before. I've just listed some of the things that are going on at the moment. So the strategic housing market assessment, retail capacity study, transport modelling hasn't begun yet, but it's something that we're working with KCC on in the background, and the call for sites I've already mentioned. Sustainability appraisal and habitat regs assessment. These are 2 critical parts of the process. They are both statutory, so they're not optional. They are part of the process. The SA, the purpose of that primarily is to show that you've considered different policy options and that you've selected an appropriate strategy, and you have to consider what's called reasonable alternatives. The habitat regulations, we have certain legal duties under the habitat regulations, which apply to plans, policies and programs, and we have to show that we have done that. And land use consultants are acting as our advisors on this particular piece of work. And lastly, duty to cooperate. As it says there at the 3rd bullet point, this isn't a duty to agree, but it is a duty to address cross-boundary issues seriously and to seek solutions wherever possible, i.e. dealt with rather than deferred. We're quite fortunate, we have regular meetings with the East Kent councils to discuss matters of common interest on local plans and other policy issues. So we meet quite regularly with Canterbury, Dover, Ashford and Folkestone Hythe. And we discuss a number of issues, including sort of best practice and how we can pull together the statements of common ground that I mentioned there. So the issues can cover all sorts of things. Historically, the issues that tend to be raised are things around transport, the transport network across East Kent, natural environment, particularly at the coast. And as I said, we are required to produce statements of common ground now that go to the examination. I have to say this is one of the first things that inspectors test. If you don't meet the duty to cooperate, in that first instance, that can bring your entire examination process to a halt. So they're the 4 areas I wanted to cover in a sort of in addition to the topic areas, because I think they're quite important. They're quite urgent in terms of starting to work on those things early on in the process. And they are things that the inspectors will look at examination, and so therefore are important to getting a plan adopted. I'll leave it there. I'm happy to take any questions that members have got. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Just before I bring Councillor Garner in, I think it might be worth you saying something about how this group works, because we've got a number of new members, and I can say as chair that it's not a decision-making group. It has no powers under the council's constitution. So can you just explain how it flows into the process of producing the update?
Yes, thank you. I will. Yeah, the purpose of this group is really to have some consideration of all these different issues. We'll bring to you evidence and reports and various other things, and the intention would be that at the end of this process, a number of recommendations on those points will go firstly to Cabinet before we go out to consultation on the local plan. So it is an advisory group, but obviously we want to hear your views, and at the end of the process we'll pull together a report for Cabinet which addresses all the different topics I've raised. I hope that covers the point.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Garner.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Yeah, it's a very thorough list of items. I have previously checked against the report from the last review group, and does seem to cover everything. One comment though, you mentioned the levelling up fund. You call it the Ramsgate levelling up fund. I know all the discussion around the levelling up fund has sort of focused on Ramsgate being the centre of attention for that, but it is in fact it is a Thanet levelling up fund, isn't it? So there will be. I know there are conversations that are going to be taking place because areas like Broadstairs is going to have a claim for, or want to be discussing receiving some of that for various issues in the town. So I was just really making that point.
Yeah, thank you. And we can certainly pick up points from the various towns about how we approach the town centres. That's for sure. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Bayford.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I wanted Adrian just to sort of ask you to elaborate a bit more when you sort of describe what this group's purpose is, and sort of seems to be a bit of a sounding board to get opinions and whatever. But we're a fairly diverse group, and I think it's going to be fairly obvious that some of us have probably got things that we feel quite strongly about. And they're likely to be opposing views within the group. How would you go about deciding what this group is actually saying in terms of taking it forward and putting in a recommendation?
I think when you look at I don't know whether it's included in the full programme, but the idea would be at one of the final CAGs for us to come to you with a set of recommendations. So obviously, from what you're saying, some of those recommendations may please some and not others. But obviously, we'll try to take into account people's views. There are going to be some difficult decisions to make. I appreciate that. But we will obviously come to you with what we believe to be recommendations based on the soundness points and what we think we can defend when we get to examination. And obviously, there will be discussions about those recommendations. So I hope that will provide the sort of right level of ability for people to add comments and to debate the issues.
Councillor Ashby.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to Adrian, thank you for the presentation. On the duty to cooperate, have you got any actual examples of where what areas have been covered with that, actually been covered in the past? Just be nice to know what sort of things you've actually come across in that particular area.
Yeah, of course. Probably the main one from the last local plan was issues around impact of development on the transport network. So there was a quite substantial amount of transport modelling done that was overseen by KCC. And the two issues that came up were from Highways England in relation to the junctions at Brenley Corner, where obviously the Thanet Way joins M2A2, and the other A2 junction with the A256 in Dover. The other issue was raised by Canterbury regarding the impact on the A28, because obviously that is not it's a busy road. There are obviously issues around Surrey already. So what we did was to do two reports from the modelling. One was about the impact on the strategic road network, so that's the A2M2, which we agreed a methodology with Highways England, and then prepared a report. These are on the council website, they're on our examination pages, so they are still there. And the other one was what we called an A28 technical study. So again, that was looking at the potential impact of traffic on the A28 resulting from development in Thanet. And obviously they have to do similar things for their plans as well. And we then shared those reports with Highways England and Dover and Canterbury, and those reports were agreed. What they essentially showed was actually the impact was relatively minor. And so, although potentially it could have been quite a serious cross-boundary issue, the work that we'd done in terms of transport modelling and reporting demonstrated that it wasn't as significant an issue, certainly as Highways England thought it might be. So that's a typical sort of example of the kind of things we need to do.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Farrance.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Adrian, for the presentation. I just wanted to ask about infrastructure and health services, because I know that in the planning applications, they include things like the costs towards education and costs towards building an extension on a GP surgery and things like that. But the real concern in Thanet is actual GPs and health workers generally, and our services at QEQM, which are being diminished all the time. So particularly for GP services, I might just hone in on that one. We don't have enough GPs in Thanet as it is. We're in dire straits, in fact, as admitted by the CCG. So I wondered what was actually happening to encourage us, to enable us to have a better health, more GPs, to keep our services and perhaps expand our services at QEQM in order to accommodate such a potential large influx of residents.
Okay, yeah. Infrastructure is always a quite difficult issue, because although we have to have regard to infrastructure delivery and we have to prepare an infrastructure delivery plan, which again are on the website, but and I can direct people to different things if they'd like to see those. But obviously with infrastructure, we are dependent on other organisations. So we have had in the past lots of conversations with both the Clinical Commissioning Group. We've had correspondence and discussions with NHS Trust, with KCC in terms of their education commissioning plan. So yes, I accept that there are other issues that need to be addressed. From a planning point of view, all we can do is look at making sure that the facilities are there, that we are tying in with the various commissioning plans. And yes, I mean, certainly the CCG have said to us in the past that part of the issue is about recruitment, and they have looked at different ways of doing that. But from a planning point of view, we need to just make sure that we are making available sufficient sites and facilities to enable that provision. But clearly we are reliant on other organisations for delivery as well. So in terms of the Education Commissioning Plan as well, KCC run that and they look at the planning for schools. We try and reflect that in the plan in terms of what provision we make for sites. And the same is true for the CCG. Hence why, you know, on some sites we're suggesting and requiring the provision of actual surgery space, and in some cases there are contributions to surgery provision or to CCG programs. But it's not a perfect answer because, as I say, we are dependent on other organisations, but obviously our role is to make sure we're doing everything we can to support their programs.
Thanks very much, Adrian. The problem is that the CCG have been aware for a few years that we are short of GPs. This is just one angle. I'm not going on to the hospital angle because I keep it simple. But we've been short of GPs, you know, in shockingly short of GPs for years, and they've been aware of that, and they say there is nothing they can do, nothing more they can do, and it's impossible to recruit. And I don't think that's acceptable. I think that there is things they could do. They haven't thought of golden handshakes. They aren't thinking about incentives. Then they say they won't. But in this situation, that might be an idea. It's not just the building, you know, that is not, we can't, it's okay having a GP surgery on extension, but if you can't get the GPs here to man it, then there's no point. So I'm concerned that they aren't listening to that.
Okay. Well, we will certainly be having discussions with the CCG again as part of the update process, and we can certainly raise those issues with them. It's not something that, you know, we can guarantee, if you like, but certainly we can have discussions with them and find out what their current plans are and try and work with their commissioning plans as best we can.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, if it's about, you know, them providing money for GP surgery building, then there could be an issue around incentives, providing incentives as well. But obviously that's up to them. But there are possibilities. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Bayford.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Adrian, I wonder whether you could elaborate a bit about the potential influence that the decision making over Manston will have on the process. I mean, what's your best guess of when decisions will finally be made? Given it could be some way away, I mean, does it mean you also have to have a plan A and a plan B going forward? Because if it's not going to be an airport, presumably it will be something else.
Yeah. Thank you for that. As you say, I'm glad you asked me that question. Yes, I mean, it's quite a difficult issue because clearly, you know, it is a large site. The decision on the DCO could be quite critical in terms of how we approach different strategies. So I think as things stand, our intention is to sort of press on and hope that the decision is made, a final decision, whatever that decision is made during the months as we're progressing the plan, so that by the time we get to submit a plan for examination, there's hopefully a very clear picture of what's happened, what the strategy is going forward, and you know, what we need to put in the plan to reflect that decision. It is a difficult one, but I think we just need to press on with the local plan and await that decision, and we'll then have to make some decisions about that. Sorry if that doesn't really answer the question, but it's quite a difficult one to deal with.
I think it would have been quite an achievement if you had been able to answer the question, Mr. Veltman. Councillor Bailey.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for the presentation, Adrian. Yeah, I mean, my concern is still, I have brought this up before, I think, the disconnect, or how the council addresses the disconnect between the public's perceived, what's the word I want, need, their perception of our need for housing and the total number of housing that we have imposed on us, the 17,000. You hear all the time that, oh, we don't want all these people coming and we don't need all these houses. And I think, with all these big projects coming up, with these big developments coming up, there's already, with the Shottendale one last week, I mean, there's already so much resistance to them. It just looks like it's going to be a huge battle going forward for the next few years. And obviously that will affect the, things like infrastructure, like the inner ring road and things like that. I just wonder if there's any way that we can explain it more clearly to the public.
Yeah, I mean, that is entirely a fair point. And it's a discussion that we have quite a lot about whether we can explain it more clearly. I mean, fundamentally, it is a government methodology that we have to follow. It is based on population growth rather than anything else. So it doesn't relate. A lot of people say, well, we don't need housing, we need jobs. But the housing number is predicated on the anticipated population growth, and that's natural growth within the district, people moving out and people moving in, and what the government figures do is to look at the total population growth and how many households that is. So I can understand why people find that difficult, and we certainly had some discussions at the examination last time about that, and I think you might have been there for some of that. But I think we perhaps need to try and find ways to explain that more clearly to local people if we can. I don't think it necessarily will lower the level of the fact that people feel that it's being foisted upon them. I don't necessarily think we can resolve that issue very simply, but certainly I think we can try and engage with people more and try and explain how those figures come about and why we have to plan for them.
I think if I can just comment on that, I think one of the things the council can do, one of the things that members can do, is inform themselves about the process as far as possible, because understandably, members get members of the public coming to them and saying, why are we building these houses? We don't want these houses. So the better understanding that councillors have of the process, and I know quite a lot of work has been done and is being done to try and communicate the issues more clearly perhaps than has been done in the past, because it is difficult, and it's always easy to say to the resident, oh, well, we agree with you. But in reality, we're not in control of a lot of these variables. Mr. Porter wanted to come in, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add to what Adrian said about the numbers, I think there's also a conversation to have about the type of homes that are delivered and the cost of those homes. And that is something that potentially could, chime with local residents whose extended family, children, or they know people that can't afford to access the home they need. And the local plan does include policies about how we can encourage the size and type of home to be constructed that meets a locally identified housing need, and also policies about the cost and the delivery of affordable housing as part of that total housing number. So those are things that directly relate to some of the things that the local community need, and worth talking about when it's raised with you. Thank you.
Councillor Ashby, you've got your hand up. I'm not sure whether that's an old hand or a current one.
No, it's a current one, Chair. Sorry, okay. Yeah, my hand is an old hand because it's the same age as me, unfortunately, so that's old. But this one is not a historical hand. I just would like to know, and I've tried to find it out via the plan, but can you tell me what the designated status is of the huge site in Central Margate for the old Royal School for the Deaf? Because when we talk about call for sites, I've got an awful feeling that this is a bit of land banking by KCC. Maybe, I don't know. I could be wrong, but could you just clarify what the status is of that? I mean, that is a massive plot. So if you could just confirm that, Adrian, that'd be great.
Thank you. Sure. We didn't include it in the last local plan for any particular purpose, because at the early stages there wasn't a particular proposal for it. You'll probably be aware of all the discussions about it being a secondary school and the discussions that KCC had with government. In the end, I don't think that finally came to anything. So it is a site that will no doubt come forward at some stage in the new local plan process. And we haven't seen anything from KCC yet in terms of land proposals, but they will usually bring things forward. Whatever comes through the call for sites in terms of the actual sites will be made public at some point, but obviously we'll bring all that back to this group for a discussion. So I think there's two things here. One is what comes through the call for sites, and obviously as I was referencing earlier, our discussions with KCC on their education commissioning plan and how that might change in the future as well.
Okay, so can I just come back on that? I mean, I'd hate, obviously, you say the call for sites finishes on the 21st of May, but if they creep past that point, I mean, it's a huge brownfield site, isn't it? And it would take a lot of pressure off of some of the other areas that, obviously we have an issue with farmers on the call for sites. It tends to be farmers trying to sell off their agricultural land for obviously increasing the value of their agricultural land, which will not be cured until such times as the Chancellor decides to charge farmers for capital gains tax on the difference between the price of farming land and building land. But it just seems to me that site has been sat there for, I think it's I don't know how long the Royal School for the Deaf, I think it's about 5 or 6 years now, and it's just a criminal waste. Maybe we could, is there some pressure that can be applied for them to decide what they want to do with it? I mean, if it's not going to be a school, it just would make such an obvious great site for a lot of housing. So, just like to flag that up, really. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, certainly we will be having conversations with KCC about various things. So certainly we can raise that with them. Whether they've got any specific intentions themselves for the site, or we can have a discussion about what it might be used for going forward.
Right. Mr. Poulter, you've still got your hand up. I'm not sure whether you intended to come in again.
Oh, no, I didn't take it down. Sorry.
All right. We always start these meetings saying we're going to use the chat, and then everybody uses the hands. So we'll perhaps have to try and be a bit more disciplined about that. Councillor Bayford.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Coming back to the housing again. I mean, we've obviously got this problem of need for housing, and people don't want big sites near them and all those good things. I mean, is there any possibility that building upwards could become part of the solution to that? And the other thing is, I mean, can you comment on, obviously we're a rapidly aging population, and there's going to be a lot of people sort of trading down, sheltered accommodation and whatever. I mean, how does things like sheltered accommodation figure in the actual housing units? I mean, does that take some pressure off the numbers?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, certainly in certain locations of the district, building upwards could contribute to the housing numbers. Various institutional uses, care homes can make a contribution. It's a slightly complicated formula that you have to use to work out how many housing numbers it creates. And the same is true for sheltered accommodation, that a certain number will add, a certain number of sheltered rooms will add up to one house in the government's methodology. So we will count all of those as part of the housing numbers. We also, you'll probably recall from last time, we also count some empty properties coming back into use as well. So all that gets counted in the numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Fellows.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Two things. It's quite clear that we need more affordable housing in Thanet. And part of one of the main policies in the local plan was 30% affordable housing on every site. Now we've got developers now holding the council to ransom because they've got to build a roundabout or a road through their site, saying that, well, we won't build that unless we can lower the affordable housing targets. Now, if they're not affordable, then they're obviously unaffordable. So, I mean, why are we now, lowering the targets that as one of the stipulation policies of our local plan?
Well, I won't comment on the individual planning applications because obviously, that's a matter for the planning applications team. But in all of these cases, there is often an issue, and it's not by any means limited to Thanet, issues of affordability. So, viability rather. So when you're looking at a particular site, we carried out a viability assessment for the local plan. That's obviously very high level. But when you look at some sites, there may be particular costs in terms of building, or particular costs in terms of clear up costs, infrastructure provision, and so on. So yes, the policy is 30%, and that's what we want to get. And arguably, we could, in terms of need, actually ask for more, but we have to pitch it at a level which we think is viable for most sites. So there is each case where they're not going to provide the affordable housing at 30%, they have to provide a viability assessment for their site. Those viability assessments are independently assessed for us by viability consultants, the same people who did the local plan work as well. Inevitably, there will be some give in that if the site cannot deliver everything, and it is not an easy decision, but the case officers, the individual case officers, will obviously prepare a report based on the viability advice they've been given, and trying to give you as members a prioritisation of what needs to be delivered. But it is a difficult set of decisions to make.
Yeah, I mean, I fully appreciate that. That infrastructure needs to be paid for, but especially along this north coast belt here, where we've got Westgate, Birchington, Garlinge, etc., where the developers have got to contribute to all the infrastructure that's going to go in. They're all going to demand that the affordable targets are lowered. We're at the point where people will be happy if there were more affordable housing to be built, yet the developers are asking for less. So I think we need to stick to our guns and stick to the 30% and not trying to lower it to 10%, where what developers are asking for.
I mean, the other thing I would say about the inner circuit in particular is that we are supporting a KCC bid for what's called Main Road Network funding, MRN funding, which is a bid to government for about £40 million. So we are looking at other sources of funding for some of the infrastructure as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And my other point was, what is the current status of the Manston Green development? Because that plan permission was given over 5 years ago now. So, I mean, it obviously expired now. So what's going to happen with the 780 homes that were going to be built there?
I don't know what the current position is in terms of any discussions that are going on with the planning applications team about any resubmission. Obviously, we would want that site to come back in and meet its full, make its full provision. I'd need to speak to Ian Livingston about that, and I can come back to you on that, Councillor Fellows, sure, if that would help.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and I've got Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, just a quick one. Is there an actual figure for the additional number of houses we need between 2031 and 2040, the additional plan period?
We haven't got a final figure yet, but it's believed to be in the region of about 4,000. If you remember last year, there was discussion about changing the standard methodology, and GL Hearn, I think, presented two different figures to this group a while back based on the two different methodologies. You'll probably also remember all the discussions and debate about what was called the mutant algorithm, and then the methodology was changed again. So we're just waiting for a final figure based on the third version of the methodology, but it will be in the region of 4,000. I think.
So will that require more infrastructure? like road networks?
Well, I think what we'll do is, once we know what that figure is, we will write to the various infrastructure providers. We'll also talk to KCC Highways about what needs to be done from a highways point of view. I think the idea with the inner circuit was to try to build in some resilience longer term, but there are obviously potential infrastructure requirements, and whether that's education or health or other things that might be associated with the additional housing. So yes, that is a set of discussions that we will need to have, and obviously we'll come back to members on that when we've had that discussion.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that, Adrian. I think that's been a useful discussion, and no doubt we'll return to many of those topics over the run of meetings of the group. Should we move on to the work programme, which has been circulated? Do you want to introduce that?
Yeah, thank you. What we've set out there is quite an intense programme, really. It's a meeting roughly every 3 weeks, right through to September, to try and cover all the various topics that were mentioned in the presentation earlier, the different aspects of it. One thing I would ask you to bear in mind is the little note at the bottom that says the topic order may be changed. This is obviously subject to how our discussions go with other organisations, when various government decisions are made about different things, and when studies finish. We will obviously try and make sure we cover all the topics at an appropriate time, but it is quite an intensive programme. I appreciate that there's quite a lot to cover in the time available. So again, happily answer any questions on.
Okay, we've got Councillor Garner, I think.
Yeah, thank you. As you say, a challenging programme of topics to cover. Especially, I'm looking at it on one or two of them. In some of these meetings might have to last over 2 hours, I would have thought. You know, we got one meeting with Port of Ramsgate and the airport DCO, and I've sort of got a concern that some of the other ones at the end might drop off and be forgotten. So can we be assured that
I don't think we'll be forgetting any topics, Councillor Garner.
Right, not forgotten, but running out of time.
I rather suspect there'll be nothing to say about the airport DCO, but we'll have to see when we get there.
I was going to say we have had a discussion about this in the team as well, about whether we've got the balance of topics right in terms of how big some of the topics are. So it may be that we sort of slightly rearrange topics so that some of the more weighty ones are perhaps balanced with some of the smaller topics, to try and keep the agendas fairly consistent. But we will definitely be trying to cover all those topics as part of this programme.
Okay. Councillor Bailey, you've got your hand up. Did you want to speak on this, or have you? Okay.
Sorry, that was an old one.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you. Okay, do members have any other questions about the work programme? I'm not seeing any. So the next meeting's on Monday the 17th of February, and we're proposing then to talk about the retail study, presentation on the retail study. Did I say February? May, 17th of May, and the local housing needs assessment. Okay. Let me go back to my agenda.
Chairman, can you tell me what time would that meeting be?
I think the assumption was that these meetings would be at 5:30. Is there a feeling that they shouldn't be at 5:30?
No, well, not particularly. Just that the 17th of May, I know, is the Broadstairs Town Council annual meeting and mayor making and so on. But so a couple of us would be affected by that potentially.
Right. Okay. Right, so that's the work programme, and I'm sure that we'll be moving forward on that. Do members have any other questions before we close tonight's meeting of the group? I've got Councillor Hopkinson. Councillor Hopkinson there?
Hey, Chair, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, I just note that the next meeting's got 2 presentations. I just wondered to what extent we can get some of the information in advance beforehand. Or, perhaps it's not needed or appropriate, but it's...
Perhaps if we'll have a think about what we might be able to provide ahead of the meeting so that you can see some of that. Certainly it might be that on the local needs housing assessment, perhaps can provide a note ahead of it, because that will be a presentation or an introduction to a report from us. The Thanet retail study will be a presentation from the external consultant, so probably may not be able to get that ahead of time, but we'll certainly have a look at that, yes.
I think any sort of framework as to what's been going to be discussed might be useful, because we have got members with different levels of experience here, obviously, and the quicker we can get to the meat of the business, the better, really. Councillor Fellows, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just quick one about future meetings. Are they going to continue to be virtual, or have we got to be back in the chamber for the meetings?
Well, there's a discussion, I think, to be had around that. I mean, at the moment, these meetings, because those meetings are informal, whatever the legislation, we can hold Cabinet Advisory Group meetings online. Okay. I think some of us find that more convenient for meetings of this type, but I think there needs to be a bigger discussion among members generally about how meetings are held going forward.
Yeah, virtual's better, especially at this time of day as well.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Farrance.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. This is just a very basic general question, but one of the things that residents are obviously saying is who is going to live in these houses that are proposed to be built in Thanet? And it obviously is a very large number. And I'm not sure how to answer that, to be honest. Obviously, there's a projected growth, but I'd be really grateful for some advice about how to answer residents' questions from that point of view.
Yes, I mean, just in general terms, it tends to be a mix. So it's either people moving house within the district to something larger or smaller. It's often children moving out of the family home when they, get their own homes or start families, and so they have a need for their own home. We do have people moving into the district as well. Some people move in at retirement. Some people move here while they're still working and then retire to the area. So it's quite a mix of different groups that take up the housing. What we could perhaps do is to try and elaborate on that a little bit as part of the report for the local housing needs assessment at the next meeting.
Thanks. Yes, it would. I mean, it's just that on the face of it, we're an area of low employment. We don't see that changing that rapidly, that we're going to become a high employing area. And it's an awful lot of houses. So, yeah, as you say, that accommodates some of the question, but it is an awful lot of houses and there isn't the work here. And I think that's what people are asking. So, yeah, that would be great to have more ability to answer that question. Thank you.
I suspect, Councillor Farrance, that if there aren't people to buy the houses, and we're talking about the ones that are obviously for sale at market prices, then the developers won't build them. And I think sometimes people do get a bit caught up in what the plan says, and as we know, the plan is a plan, and the market determines what gets delivered by and large. So it's not always the case that we're going to build lots of empty houses. I don't think we're in a position like parts of London, perhaps, where there are very large numbers of flats being built simply as a sort of financial hedge.
Yeah.
I don't think we got that in Thanet very much. So
no, I totally agree, and that is one of the answers that I give. But that's quite hard for people when they, are passionate about their farmland and our green space. Yeah. And that. It is quite difficult. I think that, and also obviously one of the first areas that's been discussed at planning has been in my ward, and it's a difficult area. It's already been established. It's not easy to build on. There's the steep incline, there's all the infrastructure, there's the flooding. So if all the areas weren't going to be built on, it seems to me that that particular area might be should be one of the last, in fact, because of the expense of the infrastructure, as I've heard it last week. So
yeah, unfortunately, the council doesn't have the ability to dictate which areas are developed first in absolute terms.
Yeah.
So again, it does largely come back to the market, I think.
Yeah.
Councillor Hopkinson, you've got a hand up. Did you want to come in again, or is that an old one?
Sorry, that's just an old hand. Sorry.
Okay. All right. If there's no other questions, members, then I'm going to close the meeting. I think that's been a useful session. Thank you to officers, Mr. Verrill in particular, for their time this evening. Thank you, members, and I look forward to seeing everybody on the 17th of May. Have a good evening.